The gray whale, also known as the gray whale, grayback whale, Pacific gray whale, or California gray whale, is a baleen whale that migrates between feeding and breeding grounds yearly. It reaches a length of 14.9 meters, a weight of 36 tons, and lives between 55 and 70 years. The common name of the whale comes from the gray patches and white mottling on its dark skin. Gray whales were once called devilfish because of the fighting behavior when hunted. The gray whale is the sole living species in the genus Eschrichtius, which in turn is the sole living genus in the family Eschrichtiidae. This mammal descended from filter-feeding whales that appeared at the beginning of the Oligocene, over 30 million years ago. The gray whale is distributed in an eastern North Pacific population and a critically endangered western North Pacific population. North Atlantic populations were extirpated on the European coast before 500 AD and on the American coast around the late 17th to early 18th centuries. However, on May 8, 2010, a sighting of a gray whale was confirmed off the coast of Israel in the Mediterranean Sea, leading some scientists to think they might be repopulating old breeding grounds that have not been used for centuries. In May and June 2013, a gray whale was sighted off the coast of Namibia, the first confirmed in the southern hemisphere. The round-trip journey of one gray whale has set a new record for the longest mammal migration, covering a distance of more than 22,000 kilometers across the Pacific Ocean. Her migration has shown new insight into how endangered species are making drastic changes in their lifestyle. Taxonomy. The gray whale is traditionally placed as the only living species in its genus and family. Recent DNA analysis indicates certain rorquals of the family Balaenopteridae, such as the humpback whale, Megaptera novaeanglii, and fin whale, Balaenoptera physalis, are more closely related to the gray whale than they are to some other rorquals, such as the minke whales. John Edward Gray placed it in its own genus in 1865, naming it in honor of physician and zoologist Daniel Frederick Eschricht. The common name of the whale comes from its coloration. The subfossil remains of now extinct gray whales from the Atlantic coasts of England and Sweden were used by Gray to make the first scientific description of a species then surviving only in Pacific waters. The living Pacific species was described by Cope as Rhachianectes glaucus in 1869. Skeletal comparisons showed the Pacific species to be identical to the Atlantic remains in the 1930s, and Gray's naming has been generally accepted since. Although identity between the Atlantic and Pacific populations cannot be proven by anatomical data, its skeleton is distinctive and easy to distinguish from that of all other living whales. Many other names have been ascribed to the gray whale, including desert whale, devilfish, grayback, mussel digger, and ripsack. The name Eschrichtius gibbosus is sometimes seen. This is dependent on the acceptance of a 1777 description by Erxleben. Description: the gray whale has a dark slate-gray color and is covered by characteristic gray-white patterns, scars left by parasites which drop off in its cold feeding grounds. Individual whales are typically identified using photographs of their dorsal surface and matching the scars and patches associated with parasites that have fallen off the whale or are still attached. They have two blowholes on top of the head, which can create a distinctive V-shaped blow at the surface in calm wind conditions. Gray whales measure from 4.9 meters in length for newborns to 13 to 15 meters for adults. Newborns are a darker gray to black in color. A mature gray whale can reach 40 t, with a typical range of 15 to 33 t. Notable features that distinguish the gray whale from other mysticids include its baleen that is variously described as cream off-white, or blonde in color and is unusually short. Small depressions on the upper jaw each contain a lone stiff hair, but are only visible on close inspection. Its head's ventral surface lacks the numerous prominent furrows of the related rorquals, instead bearing 2 to 5 shallow furrows on the throat's underside. The gray whale also lacks a dorsal fin, instead bearing 6 to 12 dorsal crenulations, which are raised bumps on the midline of its rear quarter, leading to the flukes. This is known as the dorsal ridge. The tail itself is 3 to 3.5 meters across and deeply notched at the center, while its edges taper to a point. Pacific groups. The two populations of Pacific gray whales are morphologically and phylogenetically different. Other than DNA structures, differences in proportions of several body parts and body colors, including skeletal features, and length ratios of flippers and baleen plates have been confirmed between eastern and western populations, and some claims that the original eastern and western groups could have been much more distinct than previously thought, enough to be counted as subspecies. Since the original Asian and Atlantic populations have become extinct, it is difficult to determine the unique features among whales in these stocks. However, there have been observations of some whales showing distinctive blackish body colors in recent years. This corresponds with the DNA analysis of last recorded stranding in China. Differences were also observed between Korean and Chinese specimens populations. North Pacific. Two Pacific Ocean populations are known to exist, one of not more than 130 individuals whose migratory route is presumed to be between the Sea of Okhotsk and southern Korea, and a larger one with a population between 20,000 and 22,000 individuals in the eastern Pacific traveling between the waters off Alaska and Baja California Sur. The western population is listed as critically endangered by the IUCN. No new reproductive females were recorded in 2010, resulting in a minimum of 26 reproductive females being observed since 1995. Even a very small number of additional annual female deaths will cause the subpopulation to decline. North Atlantic. The gray whale became extinct in the North Atlantic in the 18th century. Other than speculations, large portions of historical characteristic of migration and distribution are unclear, such as locations of calving grounds, existences of resident groups, and occurrences within black and AZOV seas. They had been seasonal migrants to coastal waters of both sides of Atlantic, including the Baltic Sea, Wadden Sea, the Gulf of St. Lawrence, the Bay of Fundy, and Pamlico Sound. Radiocarbon dating of subfossil or fossil European coastal remains confirms this, with whaling the possible cause. Remains dating from the Roman epoch were found in the Mediterranean during excavation of the antique harbour of La Terre near Montpellier in 1997, raising the question of whether Atlantic grey whales migrated up and down the coast of Europe from Wadden Sea to calve in the Mediterranean. Similarly, radiocarbon dating of American East coastal subfossil remains confirm grey whales existed at least through the 17th century. This population ranged at least from Southampton, New York, to Jupiter Island, Florida, the latest from 1675. In his 1835 History of Nantucket Island, Obed Macy wrote that in the early pre-1672 colony a whale of the kind called scrag entered the harbor and was pursued and killed by the settlers.
A. B. van Diens points out that the scrag whale, described by P. Dudley in 1725 as one of the species hunted by the early New England whalers, was almost certainly the gray whale. Pre-whaling abundance. Researchers used a genetic approach to estimate pre-whaling abundance based on samples from 42 California gray whales, and reported DNA variability at 10 genetic loci consistent with a population size of 76,000–118,000 individuals, 3 to 5 times larger than the average census size as measured through 2007. NOAA has collected surveys gray whale populations since at least the 1960s. They state that the most recent population estimate was approximately 19,000 whales, with a high probability that the population is at optimum sustainable population size, as defined by the Marine Mammal Protection Act. They speculate that the ocean ecosystem has likely changed since the pre-whaling era, making a return to pre-whaling numbers infeasible. Factors limiting a threatening current population levels include ship strikes, entanglement in fishing gear, and changes in sea ice coverage associated with climate change. Integration and recolonization. Several whales seen off Sakhalin and on Kamchatka Peninsula are confirmed to migrate towards eastern side of Pacific and join the larger eastern population. In January 2011, a gray whale that had been tagged in the western population was tracked as far east as the eastern population range off the coast of British Columbia. Recent findings from either stranded or entangled specimens indicate that the original western population have become functionally extinct, and possibly all the whales appeared on Japanese and Chinese coasts in modern times. A vagrant so recolonizes from the eastern population. In mid-1980, there were 3 gray whale sightings in the eastern Beaufort Sea, placing them 585 kilometers further east than the known range at the time. Recent increases in sightings are confirmed in Arctic areas of the historic range for Atlantic stocks, most notably on several locations in the Laptev Sea, including the New Siberian Islands in the East Siberian Sea, and around the marine mammal sanctuary of the Franz Josef Land, indicating possible earlier pioneers of recolonizations. These whales were darker in body color than those whales seen in Sea Ivkosk. In May 2010, a gray whale was sighted off the Mediterranean shore of Israel. It has been speculated that this whale crossed from the Pacific to the Atlantic via the Northwest Passage, since an alternative route around Cape Horn would not be contiguous to the whale's established territory. There has been gradual melting and recession of Arctic sea ice, with extreme loss in 2007 rendering the Northwest Passage fully navigable. The same whale was sighted again on May 30, 2010, off the coast of Barcelona, Spain. In May 2013, a gray whale was sighted off Walvis Bay, Namibia. Scientists from the Namibian Dolphin Project confirmed the whale's identity and thus provides the only sighting of the species in the southern hemisphere. Photographic identification suggests that this is a different individual than the one spotted in the Mediterranean in 2010. As of July 2013, the Namibian whale was still being seen regularly. Genetic analysis of fossil and pre-fossil gray whale remains in the Atlantic Ocean suggests several waves of dispersal from the Pacific to the Atlantic related to successive periods of climactic warming during the Pleistocene prior to the last glacial period and the early Holocene, immediately following the opening of the Bering Strait. This information, coupled with the recent sightings of Pacific gray whales in the Atlantic, suggests that another range expansion to the Atlantic may be commencing.